And we're back in the office using the new microphone like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Super Bowl Sunday, a frigid, fucking, ridiculously freezing, miserable day, but it is still Super Bowl Sunday here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, since it is Super Bowl Sunday, I'm still trying to make sure that my eye line is in the correct spot because with the phone in kind of panoramic mode, it's easy for me to just not look where I'm supposed to look. When I would have the phone set up, 8 to 10 feet away from me, it was easy enough because I just kind of stare in the direction of it. But when it's a more intimate setting such as this, I got to be on point. I got to be on point to a greater extent. But if my eye line is not 100% accurate, if it's only, let's say, 50% accurate, hopefully the content will be engaging enough where you will be interested in what I have to say anyway. So I was supposed to go to a Super Bowl gathering hosted by my cousin in Great Neck, but I just don't feel like making the drive from Suffolk County all the way up there, and I don't really have a rooting interest. I would say that this year I watched the least amount of football of any football season since I was, I don't know, maybe 4 years old, when I didn't really watch football and I didn't know what I was looking at, kind of thing. And it's not for any particular reason other than I just don't care. If the local teams were competitive, I probably would have been, at least somewhat into it. But both locals suck, and at least the Giants won. They won their 2 Super Bowls in the Eli Manning era. But man, if you're a Jets fan, it's a never-ending slop. The franchise is such a joke. It's such a disaster. And you almost harken back and you wish for the halcyon days of Leon Hess. At least they were fielding competitive teams. They got to the AFC Championship game with Testaverde under center. They got real close there. They had good teams with Chad Pennington. And, then they had their moments of back-to-back with Mark Sanchez. And it's crazy to think, even though Eli Manning, he probably should have gotten into the Hall of Fame already. He'll end up getting in there. But there was a moment in New York sports where there were people saying, even though Eli Manning had won Super Bowl championship, there were people saying, you would rather have Mark Sanchez going forward. Oops. So with the local teams sucking, and football is a sport where I'm just basically a fan. I'm not a psycho. It's not like with the Yankees for me, and it never was. I root for both the Jets and the Giants, which is another way of saying I'm not a real fan. Because if you're a real dyed-in-the-wool football junkie, you're in Pennsylvania, you can't root. Oh, I root for the Steelers and the Eagles. No, you don't. No, you don't. You're not a real fan. The real ones understand what I'm talking about here. But football is a sport that I've always followed. I like. As a little kid, I guess I was kind of a Pittsburgh Steelers fan for the weirdest reason. My favorite TV commercial when I was a little boy was the Mean Joe Green. Was it Coca-Cola or Pepsi? I think it was Coke. I'm not even sure. But it was a Mean Joe Green TV commercial. And I don't know. I was a Steelers fan. And so I had vague memories of the Steelers winning Super Bowl 15 over the Rams, a game they trailed going into the fourth quarter and ended up, it's one of those where if you look at the final score, it's like, oh, well, they won it by, they covered the spread. They won by 12 points. But the rivalry with the Cowboys and the Steelers, Super Bowl 10, a fantastic Super Bowl. Super Bowl 14, Jackie Smith dropping the touchdown, potential touchdown catch late in the game, and Roger Staubach, just a tremendous football player, and Tony Dorsett, and great Cowboys teams. Those teams, the Steelers of the 70s, and the whole thing with one for the thumb because the Steelers won 4 Super Bowls in the 70s. There were so many Hall of Famers on the field when those Cowboys teams played those Steelers teams. Just tremendous. And even guys who didn't make the Hall of Fame were phenomenal football players. But I have a lot of really great memories of Super Bowl Sunday and a lot of family and friend kind of bonding experiences. And the first Super Bowl that I really have a lot of memories of. Not so much memories of the game, but memories of the night and the kind of experience of the night. It was Super Bowl 15. I'm sorry. The Cowboys Steelers, it was Super Bowl 13 was the 35-31, and Super Bowl 14 was when the Steelers beat the Rams 31-19. You know, Bradshaw over Ferragamo. One of the great names of any sports figure, Vince Ferragamo. That's a great fucking name. That was the Rams quarterback. He was pretty good, you know, all-pro player, kind of matinee. I know that's a cliche, matinee idol looking guy, but the Steelers ended up getting him in that game. But Super Bowl 15. Super Bowl 15 I actually think it was the end of January. I don't think that was into February of 1981. But I was in first grade, and I grew up in Massapequa, and the house in Massapequa, my parents threw a party. And they didn't really throw that many parties. The way the house in Pequa was built, and most of those Levitt-style homes, Massapequa was like, they started to build that style home in the 60s. But my parents, the house they bought, they were the third owners. They bought, well, if you know Massapequa, they were a couple of blocks. I grew up a couple of blocks from the All-American, the famous hamburger place, which has been featured on a lot of TV programs. Guy Fieri loved the place. So I grew up over there, and the homes were, there was a basement, there was a den, there was a main floor, there was an upstairs floor, and there was an attic. So technically, they were 5-story homes. And the den had a full bar. The den had a full bar. Now, for the average person who liked to entertain, or likes to entertain, that's fantastic. That is a major selling point. Neither of my parents really drank. The joke is that when my parents got married, when they later moved into that house in, I think, 1972, my dad bought a 6-pack of beer, and, you know, 5 years later there were still 3 remaining. It just wasn't part of his life. He didn't really drink that much. But when they would host parties, at least there was the appearance of, wow, you've got a full bar, Cone, this is great. People always called my dad by his last name. But we hosted, well, not we, my parents hosted Super Bowl 15. And it was Eagles-Raiders. The Eagles of Ron Jaworski and Harold Carmichael, a Hall of Famer, Wilbert Montgomery, and the Raiders of Jim Plunkett. You know, Jim Plunkett, like Eli Manning, a guy who's not in the Hall of Fame. Jim Plunkett won 2 Super Bowls. He must have been doing something right. Yeah, I remember in the 80s, people always say, yeah, Jim Plunkett stinks. Well, what do you mean he stinks? He's got 2 Super Bowl wins. Yeah, people are really weird when it comes to that. This guy sucks, that guy sucks. But the Raiders were a wild card team, and the Eagles, it's not that they had an easy run, an easy route to the Super Bowl, but they were favorites. And something that doesn't happen that much historically. If you look at all of the games going back to the 60s, in 1967, I guess would have been the first Super Bowl. A little trivia. It's not that they didn't play a championship game. They didn't call it the Super Bowl. It was known as the title game, or the NFL championship in the days of, Y.A. Tittle, who never won a championship. And people could say, well, Tittle never won a Super Bowl. There was no Super Bowl when he played. But in all those games, there are not that many where the team that was favored and was a clear favorite just got beat up. And this particular game, my parents spared no expense. Dad, however much money that he spent, it was incredible food. And I remember watching Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey upstairs on the main floor while people started to gather downstairs in the den. We probably had about 20 guests that night. It was so much food. Everything was great. But the Eagles were the favorites. And the Raiders were the underdogs. They were 10-6 team. And it must be said, and I'm sorry for my idiot savant memory here, the Raiders really should not have gotten to that Super Bowl. They should have lost to the Cleveland Browns in the AFC Championship game. The Browns behind a phenomenal quarterback named Brian Sipe. But the field in Cleveland was a mess, and it was very difficult for kickers on either team to get a toehold for any sorts of kicks. So think of it this way. The Browns field goal kicker, I think, missed 2 field goals and an extra point. It was something like that. But just put yourself in this position. You're Forget the missed extra points, missed field goals. The Browns would have won the game if they had had a kicking game. They would have won the game if their kicking game had been anything, if there was no problem with the field where nobody could get a toehold. The Raiders have a 2-point lead, and the Browns are inside the 15-yard line. Now, you know this. We've seen this. Every once in a great while, you'll see a field goal kicker shank a 30-yard field goal with the game on the line in a big spot. But that is the exception. When you get close enough where it's almost like an extra point, you're going to make it 95% of the time. That's just the nature of football, whether it's 1981, whether it's today. But because the field was so bad, the Browns coach Sam Rutigliano, we just couldn't trust the kicker. The kicker, that nobody could get a toehold. They're sliding around on the field. So he left the game in the hands of Sipe. And, Cleveland had a lot of really shitty luck. And Sipe threw a pick. And that's how the Raiders got to the Super Bowl. The reason why, with this big windup, the Raiders were unbelievably lucky to get to the Super Bowl. And they came out and they absolutely beat the shit out of the apparently superior Philadelphia Eagles team. And the final score was 27-10, but the game wasn't even that close. The game was over in the first quarter. The Eagles could not move the ball. They couldn't move the ball. They couldn't run. Jaworski was getting beat up. There was an interception. I think Lester Hayes had a pick. Whatever. The game was 17-0 by the end of the first quarter. The game was over as a competitive contest. And maybe you could find a couple of other Super Bowls where the clear favorite got beat and handled that badly, because there were blowouts. There's 52-17 when the 49ers beat the Broncos that one year. There's that kind of blowout. And then there's a game where it feels like it's over in the first quarter, even if the final score doesn't end up, that crazy. So that was my first memory of the experience of Super Bowl and understanding this was a big deal socially. This was a big deal culturally. Everyone was talking about it at school. And in the kind of succeeding years, my parents sometimes hosted, but other times we went to a friend's house. But it was always an event. It was something I looked forward to, even though no New York team made it to a Super Bowl until the Giants really I shouldn't say that, in 86, but I wasn't rooting for the Giants at that point. I was a very anti-negative kid, and I was the sort of kid, I rooted for the Jets to lose, and I rooted for the Giants to lose. I don't know why. The same reason why I rooted for Hulk Hogan to get beat by Big John Studd. When Andre the Giant made his heel turn in 87, I was rooting for Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, and I was devastated when he lost because I had convinced myself, well, that maybe it's real, maybe they're really wrestling out there. Right, exactly. But the game itself often was secondary. And the reality is, the early 80s and through the 80s, most of the Super Bowls were blowouts. There were not that many competitive games. The following year, after what I just said, Super Bowl 16 was a good game. That was the game with the 49ers, Joe Montana's first Super Bowl win, versus the Bengals. And of course, they played later in the decade where Montana famously, a 93-yard drive to end up winning that game. It's probably the reason why Boomer Esiason is not in the Hall of Fame. If Montana doesn't pull that drive, the Bengals win a Super Bowl, and Boomer Esiason's Hall of Fame resume looks a lot better. It can't be denied. It looks a lot better. But my favorite Super Bowl, and what I'm going to talk about for, let's say, the next 10 minutes, my favorite Super Bowl was Super Bowl 20. Super Bowl 20 is otherwise known as Wide Right. Wide Right. It was the first of 4 Super Bowls involving a New York team, but not the Jets or the Giants, the Buffalo Bills. Well, the Giants played them in 1990. The Jets is what I should have said. The Jets did not get out of the AFC. They didn't get out of the AFC to the Super Bowl. They got into the AFC Championship game in the strike-shortened season, and they really got beat. Another game was 17-0, but it felt like they got blown out. The Orange Bowl, Richard Todd just getting the shit kicked out of him. Freeman McNeil slipping all over the field. What a disaster. A.J. Dewey with 2 picks, including a pick 6. What a disaster, again, for Jets fans, right? It's nothing but misery and suffering if you're a Jets fan. And I didn't really start to root for the Jets until when they got Boomer Esiason was when I started to root for the Jets. But it didn't really make any difference that I was rooting for them. But Super Bowl 20 is memorable because of the day and what happened during the day, even though I did not watch the game as it was going on. Now, for all of you youngins out there who have heard stories like this, you could watch old episodes of Seinfeld where characters are recording a Mets game or a Yankees game on a VHS tape. And you say to yourself, well, what the fuck is that? What are you even doing here? But there was a time where you couldn't do this. Well, even really young people know that. You couldn't just look stuff up on your phone. You couldn't stream anything. But I was in Florida. I had taken a vacation to Florida in, the February vacation, or there was it may have been the January into February. It was the one where there was like standardized tests or whatever it was. I was in Florida visiting my dad's parents just before Super Bowl. And I was flying home on Super Bowl Sunday. And I wanted to watch the game, but I couldn't because I was going to be on a plane, and my mother was a travel agent. She got the best possible tickets, and if we had waited till the next day, it would have been another couple of $100, which is a lot of money now, et cetera, et cetera. You understand what I'm saying? So my father was going to about 2.5, 3 hours away. I don't remember where, an old college chum of his, Irwin. I don't remember where Irwin lived, but I was to the guy's house a bunch of times later in the 90s. But he was going to this friend's house to watch the Giants and Bills Super Bowl. The Giants were, again, very lucky to get by the NFC Championship game. The Niners had won 2 straight Super Bowls, and the Giants, they knocked, it was a Jim Burt that knocked Montana out of the game, and Steve Young came in, and the Niners seemed to be in control, and then Roger Craig, a phenomenal football player, fumbled. The Giants ended up kicking a field goal and holding on, and that's how they got to the Super Bowl. And the Bills mostly blew out their opponents. They didn't really get challenged in the playoffs. The Bills were a significant favorite, even though the Giants played that kind of grind out game, good running the football and short controlled passes, a little bit of a West Coast kind of thing, because Phil Simms, who was tremendous for the first 10 or 11 games, Simms got injured. He was out for the year. And Jeff Hostetler was a pretty good pocket passer, but Hostetler was a guy who could run. So the Giants did different things. They didn't take as many downfield shots as they would with a guy like Simms, a pure old-school pocket passer. Another guy, borderline Hall of Famer. Man, Phil Simms was a fantastic football player also. San Diego State. But the Giants and Bills Super Bowl, I was going to be on the plane as the game kicked off, and the game was probably going to almost be over when we landed. So the best that my father could do, and this is a kind of thing, again, it would never happen again. It can't happen now. He said, and he promised, he was going to set up the VHS tape to obviously the correct channel, whatever's ABC. It was ABC. It was the Monday Night Football crew doing the game. Dan Deerdorf, Al Michaels, and, Frank Gifford, speaking of the New York Giants. That was my favorite trio of Monday Night Football analysts. I thought the three of them, they were so good together. Deerdorf a little bit more low-key, but Frank Gifford was terrific. Talking about a home run hitter. Man, what a great football player he was. New York Giant. I think he was a New York Giant lifer. And Al Michaels, obviously, just an amazing, amazing broadcaster across so many sports. But my dad was going to set up the tape, and he was just going to let the tape run. And the idea was, we kind of worked out the math that unless my flight was delayed, I was going to get home before the game would certainly be over, but I was going to get home before he would have finished the drive, going back from his friend Irwin's house. So the question was, were we just wasting our time? How would I not find out that the Giants either were winning, were losing, the game is over, the game is not over? Even in January, February 1991, you could not just walk through a day and not hear anything about something as critical as a Super Bowl. So I remember my grandfather, Grandpa Nat, one of the greats, he made it to 96. It's fucking nuts to think that my grandfather lived another 19 years after this. He was already in his upper 70s at this particular point. And he lived another 19 years, and he was still driving a couple of days before he died. Man, that guy was talk about an end boss of a person. But when we got on the plane, the pilot said something. I know a lot of you are going to be interested in the Super Bowl, and we're not going to pretend that it's not happening and it's not going to be happening. So some of the fans at the tower, guys working in air traffic control, we're going to get updates and we're going to pass them along to you when we get them. And, let's go Giants or whatever the guy said. So I knew we were going to be on the plane at least through halftime, and probably well into the third quarter. That was the year that Whitney Houston famously sang the national anthem. And it was also important that she sang the national anthem because the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, was still ongoing. The Gulf War. And there was something really extraordinary about her giving maybe the best rendition ever of the Star-Spangled Banner with planes flying overhead. Remember, this is more than 10 years before 9/11, right? And that was really something. But I didn't see that. At that time. So we're on the plane, and the pilot is coming in. We shouldn't have any turbulence. It seems like sunny skies, so to speak, even though, it was nighttime. He said it should be very, very pleasant. The plane probably won't be moving around very much at all. He's giving this nonsense. But then he's giving little updates. It's 3-3. It's 7-3, whatever it was. And at a certain point, it was 10-3 Bills. And this Bills team had an incredible offense. They had 3 Hall of Famers in their prime. It's one of the reasons why they ripped through the AFC that year. You had Jim Kelly, who was top 20 all-time quarterback, if I'm asked. He might even be top 15, even though he didn't win a Super Bowl. Andre Reed, a phenomenal wide receiver. And Thurman Thomas in his prime is maybe a notch below the best running backs. Like, he and Emmitt Smith, you could flip a coin. Because Thurman Thomas was so incredible catching passes out of the backfield. He could run. He was tough. Just a phenomenal player. So those were their 3 skill players. And you felt like when they got going, they were just going to score every time they had the football. So it's 10-3. And, we're getting into second quarter, whatever it is. And the last update we got, I think the pilot got depressed. He didn't give us any more updates. There was a safety. Hostetler got tripped up in the end zone. And the Giants were down 12-3. And that was the last update we got. Now, in my mind, because of safety, they get the points, and then you kick off to the other team. The Bills were going to take the free kick from the 20. They're going to score a touchdown. It's going to be 19-3 at the half. We're fucked. We're not winning this game. Woe is me. This is great. And the Yankees were terrible at that time. You start going nuts when you're a kid because the Yankees had sucked. They had lost 95 games, the kind of legendarily disgusting, horrendous, just horrifying 1990 season. I didn't think the Yanks were ever going to have any winning teams, and here we had a shot, and we're going to lose. It's going to be 52 you just go crazy. So I'm on the plane. I'm really depressed. We don't get any more updates. I just keep hearing in my head, it's 12-3, it's 12-3, it's 12-3. So the plane lands, no more updates. And I say, you know what? I had money to just get a cab home. I hope that I'm able to get home and I can pick up the game at 12-3, rewind the VHS tape, whatever. Pick up the game at 12-3. I'm hoping that nobody says anything, that nobody screams, fucking piece of shit Giants, what a disgusting law, nothing. I'm in the airport, I had headphones, and I turned music on. It was an old school, not even a Discman, it was a Walkman. I turned music on, I kept my head down like I had blinders on. I didn't want to listen to anybody's conversation. Anybody in the lounge over there, maybe watching the game, which would be in the latter stages, nothing. Put my headphones on, and I didn't want to know from shit. I didn't look up at any board, congratulations, Bills, nothing. I make it out to the parking lot, and I get one of those Winston limousines. Some of you, if you've ever flown into JFK or LaGuardia, you might remember Winston. They weren't limousines. They were basically vans, but they called them Winston limousines. I guess Winston was the name of the company. So I get a Winston limousine. It was like $50 or something. And I figure, I got like 100 and something in cash. I'll tip the guy $10, whatever, my 17-year-old brain, whatever I'm telling myself. So the guy drives, and my father and I lived we were in Woodbury. Actually, I still lived in Massapequa technically, but I spent most of my time in Woodbury, even though I was going to school, Massapequa High School in Massapequa. My dad would drive me every morning. It would seem like an absurd thing, but the drive from Woodbury to Massapequa, if you live right on top of Route 135, you're at Massapequa High School in 15 minutes. It's not a bad drive at all. But anyway, I get home, and by the time I get home, I calculate that for sure the game's over. Super Bowl 20 has ended. A winner has already been decided. I'm going to stop the tape. I'm going to rewind it, and then I'm going to visual fast forward until it gets to 12-3, and then I'll just, watch the game from there and go fast forward through the commercials. Now, in my mind, the Giants lost this game because it was going to be 19-3 from 12-3, and the Giants, it's not that they didn't have any offense, but they just didn't have the skill players on offense that the Bills did. The guys I mentioned with Kelly and Reed and the just incredible Thurman Thomas. So I get to the point where it's 12-3, and shocker of shockers, the Bills did not score on the possession after the safety. And then the Giants came back and scored a touchdown to make it 12-10. And the teams battled. Otis Anderson, I thought that Jeff Hostetler should have been the MVP, but they ended up giving it to O.J. Anderson, or Otis Anderson, who had a kind of a legendary, iconic run where he broke free. Now, Otis Anderson was well past his prime, but he was a big guy, and he knew how to hit holes, and he was the sort of running back, he was almost like a fullback by this point in his career, and defenders really didn't like hitting him because he hit back. He hit back. And there was a famous play where Otis Anderson, who rarely got out into the open field, he got into the open field, and another terrific player, the Bills safety, Steve Tasker, came over to try to, you could see he wasn't going to go for a touchdown. And he went over to make a stop, and O.J. Anderson wound up almost like a boxer throwing an uppercut. And he brought his arm up, but what he was doing was he brought his arm up to hit the guy with his elbow or with his shoulder. He didn't want to commit a penalty. And I think that's the play that got Otis Anderson the MVP award. So went through it very slowly, and the Giants took the late lead, and then the Bills had a kind of desperate drive to try to set up a field goal. And there were a couple of plays where the clock started running, and I feel like if it had happened to the Giants, it would have been more controversial. The clock started running, and I don't think that the timekeeper did it correctly, because the Bills, I can admit this now, the Bills should have had a little bit more time than they did. And so they ended up having to settle for a 47-yard field goal try. Now, under normal circumstances, let's say you have an all-pro kicker on turf in a neutral site where there's no weather going on, because this particular game where it was played it was either Arizona or Florida. Weather was not an issue, is what I'm saying. This was not one of those games where the weather played a factor. It did not. So the Bills kicker was this guy, Scott Norwood, who was okay. But there are kickers where a 47-yard field goal, let's say on turf, is at least 80% that they're going to make it. Maybe even more than 80. Somebody like a Morton Anderson or a Gary Anderson, no relation. Guys like that. They're going to knock the kick through at 80, 90% for sure. But this guy on grass, it would have been an upset if he made it. And that's not something that I knew going in. I wasn't thinking of that, because why would that have even come up? So here I am watching a tape. I'm watching a VHS tape. And I have it freeze framed where I'm moving it literally one frame at a time. As Norwood kicks the ball, and when the ball first goes up, my heart sinks, because it looks like it's not exactly down the middle, but it looks like it's going to clear, the goal where it'll stay inside the right upright. But as I push the freeze frame, the ball is moving further and further out. And when it gets about maybe halfway, I realize he missed this fucking kick. He missed this kick. So I rewind it about 2 minutes to get geared up, because now I'm about 95% sure he didn't even really get that close. This kick he just missed it. He shanked it. Wide right. Scott Norwood missed that kick. And it was such a shock, because most of the announcers and most of the, kind of football experts, they didn't know if the Giants were even going to be competitive. Like, nobody picked the Giants in a blowout. Some people picked the Bills in a tight game like this kind of game. Some people said, well, the Giants with the defense, Lawrence Taylor was still there, and they had Everson Walls, who was still pretty good, and Carl Banks. The Giants defense is always their bread and butter, and maybe they can get the Bills to make some mistakes. The Bills did make some mistakes. But Norwood missed that kick, and it was just unbelievable. That this was the first championship of a team I was rooting for that I got to experience. I was 4 years old in 1978 when the Yankees won the World Series. I was 3 the previous year when the Yankees won the World Series. But it was glee, it was elation. And I couldn't wait to get to school the next day because this is what we were going to talk about. We won a fucking Super Bowl. And that year, I watched almost every game. I was a real fan, as if I have to prove my fan. And people, I don't watch that many Yankee games. And when you have people saying, well, he's not a real fan, go fuck yourself. You want to go history of the New York Yankees? Don't tell me I'm not a real fan because I don't want to suffer through a 3.5-hour game in April like everyone else. Anyway, my dad got home an hour later, and he could not believe it. He said, Jared, when it was 12-3 and we're kicking off, I said, this game's over. He was actually going to go home if the Bills got the touchdown at 12-3. Like, that's how down he was. And the crowd, they were all rooting for the Giants. It was just so like, oh, this is, doomsday. And then all of a sudden, Bills don't score, Giants score, and then it was really a dogfight the rest of the way. But that is 35 Super Bowls ago. 35 Super Bowls ago. A time where you would record something on VHS and hope that nobody was going to blab and give you the score. Yeah, too bad the Yankees lost. Like that kind of thing. That did happen. There were times where I recorded a Yankee game and my dad let slip, yeah, fucking Righetti blew the game. Well, all right, at least you saved me from having to suffer through it. But it's about a half hour from game time right now. We have a rematch, although I don't think any of the same players from, 9-10 years ago, the Malcolm Butler, Russell Wilson, and, beast mode, Marshawn Lynch. But we have Patriots and Seahawks, and I don't really have a dog in this fight. Unlike Tom Brady, I'm neutral on this one. I'm Sweden. I'm Switzerland. I'm completely neutral. I don't have any dog. Tom Brady's saying I don't have any dog in a fight. Give me a fucking break. Come on, Tom. You're allowed to say, I love New England. The fans had my back during Deflategate. Why did Bill Belichick not make the whole thing? Whatever. Hopefully we will get a great football game. And the way that I define a great Super Bowl, it's not anything that wacky. Is the game's outcome still in doubt in the fourth quarter? And what that would mean is it's, let's say, within 10 points. If it's within 10 points, that's a really good Super Bowl. So hopefully, because neither team is so explosive that you think it's going to be a 46-10 a la when the Bears beat the Patriots, the Bears' famous year where they went 15-1 and just killed everybody. That's one of the 5 greatest teams in NFL history. The Mike Ditka, the 85 Bears with Jim McMahon under center, and a still fantastic Walter Payton running the ball, and William the Refrigerator Perry, there's a name from the past, who ended up being a pretty good defensive tackle, but he also scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl, something that unfortunately Walter Payton didn't do. That was his one time in the Super Bowl, and they decided to give the ball to the fridge. But we don't need to talk about that. Just wanted to give you my thoughts on Super Bowl, not so much tonight's game, but Super Bowl memories, and the one specific memory when I was just a 17-year-old kid, desperate to see a championship from a team that I had rooted for, and would I be able to navigate my way through 5 hours of travel without finding out anything about the game? Well, I failed because of the pilot. But other than the early updates, I went home a second half virgin. I knew nothing, and I was so pleasantly surprised that the 1990-91 New York Giants captured Super Bowl 20 when Scott Norwood went wide right. This has been episode 674 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Super Bowl Sunday here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace. Let's have a great Super Bowl.